A teen farmer protects horses from a slaughterhouse truck, but 2 days later, a billionaire's private army surrounds his ranch. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The sound of heavy rain against the barn roof was the only thing 17-year-old Ethan Miller could hear as he finished mucking out the last stall. His muscles ached from the day's work, but there was a satisfaction in the physical labor that kept his grandfather's small horse rescue running. The rescue was his life now, had been for the past 3 years since his parents' accident left him in his grandfather's care. "That's it, Willow," he murmured, stroking the dappled gray mare's neck as she nudged his shoulder affectionately. "Everyone's fed and settled for the night." Lightning flashed, illuminating the weathered interior of the barn through the windows. Thunder followed almost immediately, causing several of the horses to shift nervously in their stalls. "It's all right," Ethan called out, his voice steady and reassuring. "Just a storm passing through." He gave Willow one final pat before heading toward the barn doors, pausing to check that each stall was properly secured. 12 horses in total, each with their own story, each saved from neglect or abuse or simply abandonment when their owners could no longer afford to keep them. His grandfather had started the rescue 20 years ago, and though they struggled financially, they'd managed to save hundreds of horses over the years. The wind howled as Ethan pushed one of the barn doors open just enough to slip through. He pulled his worn jacket tighter around his lanky frame and made a dash for the farmhouse 50 yards away, its windows glowing warmly against the stormy darkness. The kitchen was filled with the aroma of beef stew when he entered, stomping his feet on the mat and shaking the rain from his dark hair. "Everyone settled in?" his grandfather asked from where he sat at the kitchen table. Bills spread out before him, his weathered face lined with worry. "Yeah, all good," Ethan replied, trying not to notice how his grandfather's hand trembled slightly as he moved papers around. At 72, Jackson Miller was still strong, but the years of physical labor had taken their toll. "How bad is it?" His grandfather sighed, removing his reading glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Property taxes went up again. Feed costs aren't helping either." Ethan hung his jacket on the hook by the door and moved to the stove, ladling stew into 2 bowls. "We'll figure it out, Gramps. We always do." Jackson nodded, clearing the bills away as Ethan set the food on the table. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the clink of spoons against bowls and the persistent drumming of rain on the roof. "Mrs. Hendricks called," Jackson said finally. "Said she might be able to take in Clover next month." Ethan nodded, feeling a mix of emotions. Clover was a sweet young mare they'd rehabilitated over the past 6 months. Finding her a good home was a win. It was the whole point of what they did. But he'd grown attached to her. "That's good," he managed. "She's got that nice property out by the lake, right?" 15 acres all fenced, Jackson confirmed. "Clover would have a good life there." The conversation drifted to other topics. The fence in the north pasture that needed mending, the local high school's upcoming graduation that Ethan wasn't particularly looking forward to, the weather forecast for the coming week. Normal things. Safe things. Not the mounting bills or the fact that their small operation was struggling more with each passing month. After dinner, Ethan helped with the dishes before retreating to his room to tackle his homework. As the valedictorian of his graduating class, he had a reputation to maintain, even if his mind was more often occupied with the rescue than with schoolwork. He'd already secured a scholarship to the state university's veterinary program, his ticket to eventually taking over the rescue operations with actual medical knowledge to better help the horses. The storm continued through the night, and Ethan found himself waking frequently, listening for any sounds of distress from the barn. By morning, the rain had stopped, though dark clouds still hung low in the sky, threatening more to come. "Gonna check on everyone," Ethan called to his grandfather as he pulled on his boots by the back door. "I'll come with you," Jackson replied, setting down his coffee mug. Need to see about that leak in the tack room anyway. They walked to the barn together, the ground muddy and slick beneath their feet. The world smelled fresh after the rain, the spring air filled with the scent of wet earth and growing things. The peaceful morning routine was shattered the moment they crested the small rise that gave them a view of the main road. A large truck was parked at their gate. Not just any truck, but a double-decker livestock trailer. Two men in dark jackets stood by the gate, and even from a distance, Ethan could see they were trying to force the lock. "What the hell?" Jackson muttered, picking up his pace despite the slippery ground. As they approached, Ethan noticed the logo on the side of the truck. Westland Meat Processing. His blood ran cold. "Hey!" he shouted, breaking into a run. "What do you think you're doing?" The men turned, startled by the sudden interruption. One was tall and thin with a gaunt face, the other shorter and powerfully built. Neither looked particularly friendly. "Miller property?" the taller one asked, his voice flat and emotionless. "Yes, and you're trespassing," Jackson replied, his tone firm despite his age. "State your business or get off my land." The shorter man pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket and held it out. "Court order. We're here to collect the horses." Ethan felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. "What? That's impossible." Jackson snatched the paper, unfolding it with shaking hands. His face paled as he read. "This can't be right. There must be some mistake." "No mistake," the tall man said. "Property's been foreclosed. Assets are being seized. Those horses are now property of Westland Holdings." "Foreclosed," Ethan echoed, his mind reeling. "That's not possible. We've been making the payments." Jackson's face had gone from pale to ashen. "Son, Your grandfather took out a secondary mortgage 3 years ago," the shorter man interrupted. "Payments have been delinquent for 6 months. Notification was sent 60 days ago." 3 years ago, right after Ethan's parents died, when medical bills and funeral costs had nearly bankrupted them. His grandfather had never mentioned a second mortgage. "You can't take the horses," Ethan said, his voice rising with panic. "They're rescue animals, not livestock. They're not meant for—" He couldn't even say it. "Not our problem, kid," the tall man replied with a shrug. "We've got orders to collect 12 horses and transport them to the Westland processing facility." "Processing facility?" Ethan felt sick. "You mean Slaughterhouse? You're going to kill them?" Neither man responded, which was answer enough. "This is insane," Jackson said. "We weren't properly notified. We need time to—" "You had time," the shorter man cut him off. "Now step aside and open the gate, or we'll have to call the sheriff to enforce the order." Ethan looked at his grandfather, whose face showed a mixture of shock, shame, and desperation. In that moment, Ethan made a decision. "No," he said, stepping in front of the gate. "I'm not letting you take them." The two men exchanged glances. "Kid, don't make this harder than it has to be," the tall one said. "This is happening whether you like it or not." Ethan stood his ground, heart pounding. "Those horses are under my care. I'm responsible for their safety. You're not taking them to be slaughtered." The shorter man reached for his phone. "That's it. I'm calling the sheriff." "Go ahead," Ethan replied, surprising himself with how steady his voice sounded. "And while you're at it, call the local news. I'm sure they'd love to hear how Westland Meat Processing is trying to slaughter rescue horses, including 3 that were saved from abuse cases still pending in court. Those horses are evidence in criminal proceedings." He was bluffing about the news, but not about the abuse cases. 3 of their horses had indeed been rescued as part of animal cruelty investigations. The men hesitated, looking uncertain for the first time. "The boy's right," Jackson added, catching on to Ethan's strategy. "Those animals are under protective custody. You take them, and you're interfering with active investigations." The shorter man lowered his phone slightly. "That wasn't in the paperwork." "Check again," Ethan challenged. "Or better yet, Call your boss and explain the legal nightmare you're about to create." The two men stepped away for a hushed conversation. Ethan could see the uncertainty in their body language. After a minute, the taller one approached again. "We'll be back," he said, his voice cold with threat. "With the proper documentation. Don't think this is over, kid." They climbed back into their truck, the engine roaring to life with a belch of diesel fumes. As they pulled away, Ethan felt his knees go weak with relief. "Gramps," he said, turning to his grandfather. "What's going on? Foreclosure? A second mortgage?" Jackson's shoulders slumped, suddenly looking every one of his 72 years. "I'm sorry, Ethan. I've been trying to fix this. Been trying to find a way out." "Why didn't you tell me?" "You're just a boy," Jackson replied. "You shouldn't have to worry about these things." "I'm 17, not 7, Ethan said, anger and fear mixing in his voice. "Those are my horses, too. I deserve to know they were in danger." His grandfather nodded slowly. "You're right. I should have told you. I didn't want to fail you like I failed your mother." The raw pain in his grandfather's voice doused Ethan's anger. "You haven't failed anyone, Gramps. But we need to figure this out. Those guys will be back, and next time they'll be prepared." Jackson squared his shoulders, some of his usual determination returning. "Let's go check on the horses. Then we need to make some calls." As they walked toward the barn, Ethan's mind raced. He had bought them some time with his quick thinking, but he knew it was only a temporary reprieve. Somehow he needed to find a way to save the horses and their home before it was too late. Inside the barn, the horses sensed something was wrong. Willow paced anxiously in her stall, and several others nickered nervously as Ethan and Jackson entered. Ethan moved from stall to stall, checking each horse, whispering reassurances he wasn't sure he believed himself. "It'll be okay," he murmured to Clover, the young mare who might have had a new home soon. "I won't let them take you." Jackson disappeared into the small office at the back of the barn, returning moments later with a stack of folders. "These are the documents for Phoenix, Shadow, and Daisy," he said, referring to the 3 horses involved in the abuse cases. "I'll call the district attorney's office as soon as they open." Ethan nodded, still trying to process everything. "How much do we owe, Gramps?" His grandfather's face fell. "Almost $60,000 on the second mortgage. With the penalties and fees they've added." He trailed off, shaking his head. "There has to be something we can do," Ethan insisted. "Some way to stop this." "I've been trying, son. I've called everyone I could think of. Banks won't refinance with my credit history, and I'm too old for them to take a chance on a new loan." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, frustration building. "What about selling some of the land? We've got 40 acres. Already looked into it. The zoning restrictions make it complicated, and the only interested buyer was who?" Jackson sighed. "Maxwell Blackwood." Ethan's jaw clenched at the name. Maxwell Blackwood was the wealthiest man in the county, a tech billionaire who'd moved to their rural community 5 years ago and started buying up property. He'd built a massive compound just 3 miles from their modest farm. "What did he offer?" Ethan asked. "Half of market value," Jackson replied. "Said it was a generous offer considering the circumstances. I told him what he could do with his generosity." Despite everything, Ethan couldn't help but smile at that. His grandfather was nothing, if not proud. "So what do we do now?" Jackson carefully placed the folders on a hay bale. "First, we document everything about those 3 horses in the abuse cases. That might buy us some legal protection, at least for them. Then we start calling everyone. The bank, our lawyer, animal rights groups, anyone who might be able to help." The rest of the morning passed in a blur of phone calls, most leading nowhere. The bank confirmed the foreclosure was real and proceeding legally. Their lawyer, an old friend of Jackson's who often worked pro bono, promised to look into options, but didn't sound hopeful. Animal welfare organizations were sympathetic, but limited in what they could do on such short notice. By noon, Ethan was feeling the weight of their situation crushing down on him. He sat on the porch steps, watching dark clouds gathering again on the horizon, when the rumble of an approaching vehicle caught his attention. For a terrible moment, he thought the Slaughterhouse truck had returned. Instead, a familiar beat-up Jeep appeared, pulling up beside the house. Megan Chen, Ethan's best friend since elementary school, jumped out, her long black hair tied in a hasty ponytail, concern etched on her face. "I came as soon as I got your text," she said, climbing the steps and sitting beside him. "Is it really as bad as you said?" Ethan nodded, the lump in his throat making it hard to speak. Megan had volunteered at the rescue almost as much as he worked there. She loved the horses nearly as much as he did. 12 horses, he finally managed. "They want to send 12 horses to slaughter, Meg. Our horses." Megan's hand found his, squeezing tightly. "We won't let that happen." "I don't see how we can stop it. We need $60,000 we don't have." "There has to be a way," she insisted. "What about a fundraiser? Or, wait, what about your scholarship money?" Ethan shook his head. "Even if I gave up college, my scholarship is paid directly to the university. I can't use it for this." They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the distant rumble of thunder. "What about Blackwood?" Megan asked suddenly. "What about him?" "He's literally a billionaire, Ethan. And doesn't his daughter ride? Maybe he'd be interested in saving the horses, not just buying the land." Ethan frowned. "Gramps already tried selling him some land. He lowballed us." "That was business," Megan argued. "This is different. This is about saving animals from slaughter. It's worth a try, isn't it?" Before Ethan could respond, his phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize. "Hello? Is this Ethan Miller?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, who's this?" "My name is Rebecca Torres. I'm an attorney with the district attorney's office. We received a call from your grandfather regarding 3 horses in your care that are evidence in pending abuse cases." Ethan straightened up. "Yes, that's right. Phoenix, Shadow, and Daisy. I've reviewed the files," Torres continued. "While it's true these animals are considered evidence, I'm afraid that doesn't automatically protect them from asset seizure in a foreclosure." Ethan's heart sank. "But they can't be sent to slaughter. They're victims." "I understand your concern," Torres said, her voice softening slightly. "The best I can do is request a temporary stay for those specific animals while we determine if alternative arrangements can be made. But I have to be honest, it would only apply to those 3 horses, and it would be temporary." "How temporary?" "A week, maybe 2 at most. I'm sorry I can't offer more." After thanking her and hanging up, Ethan relayed the conversation to Megan, who looked as discouraged as he felt. "At least it's something," she said, trying to sound positive. "Maybe we can use those 2 weeks to figure out a solution for all of them." Ethan nodded, though he didn't share her optimism. "We should go tell Gramps." They found Jackson in the kitchen, hanging up the phone with a defeated expression. "That was our lawyer," he said before they could speak. "He says everything appears to be in order with the foreclosure. We might be able to file for an emergency stay, but without funds to back it up, it's unlikely to be granted." Ethan shared the news about the 3 horses that might receive temporary protection. Jackson nodded, a small victory in an otherwise losing battle. "What about Maxwell Blackwood?" Megan suggested again. "His estate is just a few miles from here. Maybe he'd be willing to help." Jackson's expression hardened. "That man doesn't help anyone unless there's something in it for him." "But he has a daughter, right?" Megan pressed. "Sophia? I've seen her at horse shows. Maybe she'd care about what happens to these horses." "Megan has a point, Gramps," Ethan said slowly. "We don't have a lot of options. It can't hurt to try." Jackson looked between the 2 teenagers, his resistance wavering in the face of their determination. "Fine," he finally conceded, "but I'm not going hat in hand to Maxwell Blackwood. The man already thinks I'm a failure. We'll go, Ethan said quickly. Megan and I today. Jackson looked like he wanted to argue, but eventually nodded. Be careful. Men like Blackwood don't see the world like normal folks. Everything's a transaction to them. After getting directions to the Blackwood estate, Ethan and Megan set out in her Jeep. The rain had started again, a light drizzle that matched Ethan's mood. As they drove, he stared out at the passing countryside, the rolling hills and farmland that had been his home his entire life. It's going to work out, Megan said, glancing over at him. Somehow. Ethan nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He was terrified, not just of losing the horses, but of failing his grandfather, of watching the rescue that had been Jackson's life's work slip away. The Blackwood estate appeared ahead, marked by an imposing stone wall that ran along the road for nearly half a mile before reaching an ornate iron gate. Megan pulled up to the security intercom and rolled down her window. State your business, a crisp voice demanded through the speaker. We're here to see Mr. Blackwood, Megan replied. Or Sophia. It's about the Miller horse rescue. There was a pause, and then, Mr. Blackwood is not expecting visitors. Please, Ethan leaned across Megan to speak into the intercom. It's an emergency. 12 horses are going to be sent to slaughter if we can't get help. Another pause, longer this time. Just as Ethan was about to speak again, the gate began to swing open. Proceed to the main house, the voice instructed. Park in the designated area. Someone will meet you. As they drove through the gate, Ethan caught his first glimpse of the Blackwood compound. The main house was a modern mansion of glass and stone, perched on a hillside overlooking a private lake. To the east stood a large, stable complex that looked more luxurious than most homes. I knew he was rich, Megan murmured, but this is another level. They parked where indicated and had barely stepped out of the Jeep when a tall, elegant woman appeared on the front steps of the mansion. She looked to be in her 40s, dressed impeccably in riding clothes. I'm Caroline Blackwood, she said as they approached. Maxwell's wife. I understand you have some trouble with your horses? Ethan swallowed hard, suddenly aware of his muddy boots and worn jeans. Yes, ma'am. I'm Ethan Miller, and this is Megan Chen. We're from the Miller Horse Rescue, and we're in serious trouble. Caroline Blackwood studied them with cool appraisal, her expression giving nothing away. Come inside, she said finally. You can explain the situation properly. She led them through massive double doors into an entryway that could have swallowed Ethan's entire house. Everything was pristine white marble and glass, with artwork that probably cost more than the Miller farm itself, adorning the walls. Wait here, Caroline instructed, gesturing to a sitting area with sleek modern furniture that looked too perfect to actually sit on. I'll see if my husband is available. As soon as she disappeared down a hallway, Megan let out a low whistle. This place is insane, she whispered. I feel like I might break something just by breathing on it. Ethan nodded, too nervous to speak. Now that they were here, he had no idea what to say. How could he possibly convince one of the richest men in the country to help them? What do you think she meant about if he's available? Megan asked. Like he might be too busy to talk about saving 12 horses from slaughter? Before Ethan could answer, rapid footsteps approached from a different hallway. A girl about their age rushed into the room, slightly out of breath. She was tall and slender, with dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, dressed in expensive-looking riding clothes. Is it true? She demanded without preamble. The Miller rescue horses are going to be slaughtered? Ethan recognized her immediately. Sophia Blackwood, who dominated every equestrian competition in the region with her imported warm-blood horses. They'd never actually spoken, despite competing at some of the same events. But he knew her by reputation. Talented, intense, and according to most, utterly spoiled. Yes, he replied, standing up straighter. The property's been foreclosed. A meat processing company is claiming ownership of the horses. Sophia's face paled. That's barbaric. When is this happening? They already tried once this morning, Ethan explained. We managed to hold them off temporarily, but they'll be back soon. How many horses? 12. Sophia's expression hardened with determination. Wait here, she commanded, turning on her heel and disappearing down the same hallway her mother had taken. Ethan and Megan exchanged glances. That might be good, right? Megan whispered. She seemed upset about it. Before Ethan could respond, voices drifted from the hallway, Sophia's rising in what sounded like an argument, and a man's deeper tones responding firmly. A moment later, Sophia reappeared, followed by a tall man with salt and pepper hair and piercing blue eyes. Maxwell Blackwood looked exactly like his photos in business magazines. Perfectly tailored clothes, commanding presence, and an expression that suggested he was constantly calculating the value of everything and everyone around him. Mr. Miller, he said, his voice clipped and businesslike. My daughter tells me you're having some trouble with your rescue operation. Ethan fought the urge to fidget under the man's intense gaze. Yes, sir. The bank has foreclosed on our property, and Westland Meat Processing is claiming ownership of our horses. They intend to send them to slaughter. Westland, Blackwood repeated, his expression unchanging. Subsidiary of Ackerman Holdings, if I recall correctly. I don't know, sir. All I know is they showed up this morning with a livestock trailer, ready to take our horses. And how much is owed on the property? Ethan hesitated, embarrassed to reveal their financial troubles to this man, who probably spent more on breakfast than their entire farm was worth. The second mortgage is about $60,000. With fees and penalties, it's closer to $75,000 now. Blackwood nodded, as if confirming something he already knew. And you're here because you think I might help you? It wasn't a question, but Ethan answered anyway. Yes, sir. We've tried everything else. These horses, they're not livestock. They're rescue animals. Some were abused, others abandoned. They trust us to protect them. Dad, Sophia interjected, we have to help them. You know what happens at those processing plants. Blackwood gave his daughter a measured look. I'm aware of the situation, Sophia. But business is business. If the bank has foreclosed legally, then... This isn't about business, Sophia interrupted, her voice rising. This is about 12 innocent animals who are going to die horribly if we don't do something. Caroline, who had been standing silently in the doorway, stepped forward. Perhaps we should discuss this privately, Maxwell. There's nothing to discuss, Blackwood replied coolly. I made an offer on the Miller property 6 months ago. It was rejected rather colorfully, as I recall. Ethan felt heat rise to his face. My grandfather was protecting our home. The rescue has been his life's work. And yet he failed to maintain the mortgage payments, Blackwood observed. Sentiment is a poor substitute for sound financial management, young man. Dad, Sophia exclaimed, clearly mortified. These are people's lives you're talking about. And the horses are collateral in a defaulted loan, Blackwood cut her off. That's the reality. Ethan felt something snap inside him. All the fear and frustration of the day crystallized into a sudden, clear anger. Reality? He echoed, his voice steadier than he expected. Let me tell you about reality, Mr. Blackwood. The reality is that those horses survived abuse, neglect, and abandonment. They fought to live. The reality is that my grandfather worked his entire life to give animals a second chance when no one else would. The reality is that I know the name, personality, and history of every single horse at our rescue, while you probably don't even know the names of all the staff who work on your estate. The room fell silent. Megan stared at him with wide eyes, and even Sophia looked surprised at his outburst. Blackwood's expression remained impassive, though something flickered briefly in his eyes. You're passionate, he said finally. I respect that. But passion doesn't pay bills. Maybe not, Ethan agreed, but it means something. Those horses mean something. And if you can stand by and let them be slaughtered when you have the power to help, then you're not the man everyone thinks you are. Another silence followed, tense and electric. Caroline cleared her throat softly, but before she could speak, the sharp ring of a phone cut through the air. Blackwood pulled a sleek device from his pocket, glancing at the screen. "I need to take this," he said, his tone making it clear the conversation was over. "Caroline, see our guests out." As he turned to leave, Sophia stepped into his path. "Dad, please. I'll use my trust fund. I have access to part of it now that I'm 18. Blackwood's expression softened slightly, the first real emotion Ethan had seen from him. "No, Sophia. That money is for your future." "This is my future," she insisted. "If you won't help them, I will." Father and daughter stared at each other for a long moment, some unspoken communication passing between them. Finally, Blackwood sighed. "Wait here," he instructed, before answering his phone and walking away. Caroline offered them a small, apologetic smile. "Would you like something to drink while you wait?" Ethan shook his head, too wound up to think about refreshments. Sophia paced the room restlessly, while Megan sat perched on the edge of a chair, looking as uncomfortable as Ethan felt. After what seemed like an eternity, Blackwood returned, his expression unreadable as ever. "That was my assistant," he said. "I've had him look into the situation with your property." He paused, studying Ethan with that calculating gaze. "Here's what I'm prepared to offer. I will purchase the debt from the bank, effectively becoming your mortgage holder. This would stop the foreclosure process immediately." Ethan's heart leapt, but Blackwood raised a hand to forestall any premature gratitude. "In exchange," he continued, "I want 50% of your property, specifically the wooded acres that border my estate. I'll allow you to maintain the rescue operation on the remaining land, with the condition that you accept my daughter as a partner in the enterprise. She's been wanting more responsibility, and this seems like an appropriate opportunity." Sophia looked as surprised as Ethan felt. "Dad, what—" "Additionally," Blackwood pressed on, "I expect the operation to become financially self-sustaining within 1 year. My financial team will help restructure your business model. If you fail to meet agreed-upon benchmarks, I reserve the right to acquire the remaining property at market value." Ethan's mind raced. This wasn't charity. It was a business deal, with strings attached. They would lose half their land immediately, and potentially the rest, if they couldn't make the rescue profitable, something they'd never managed to do in 20 years of operation. "I need to discuss this with my grandfather," he said finally. Blackwood nodded once. "Of course, but I should warn you. My sources tell me Westland Processing has obtained the proper documentation to collect all 12 horses. They'll likely return tomorrow morning with law enforcement if necessary. My offer expires at midnight tonight." "Why are you doing this?" Ethan asked suddenly. "Why not just wait for the foreclosure and buy the whole property then?" For the first time, something like respect showed in Blackwood's eyes. "A fair question. Let's just say I appreciate individuals who stand up for what they believe in, even against impossible odds." He glanced at his daughter. "And sometimes family considerations factor into business decisions, however inadvisable that might be." Sophia beamed at her father, then turned to Ethan. "Let me come back with you. I want to see the rescue, meet the horses." "Sophia," Caroline began. "If I'm going to be a partner in this venture, I should see what I'm getting into," Sophia insisted. Blackwood considered this, then nodded. "Take security with you." "Dad, it's a horse rescue, not a war zone." "Nevertheless." 20 minutes later, Ethan found himself in the bizarre situation of leading a convoy back to his grandfather's modest farm. Megan's Jeep in front, followed by Sophia's luxury SUV and a black security vehicle trailing behind. What just happened? Megan asked as they drove. Did we just get saved or sold out? Ethan shook his head, still processing. I honestly don't know, but it might be our only chance to save the horses. As they approached the farm, Ethan caught sight of his grandfather standing on the porch, watching their arrival with obvious confusion. Whatever happened next, Ethan knew one thing for certain. Nothing at the Miller Horse Rescue would ever be the same again. Jackson Miller stood on the porch, arms crossed over his chest, his weathered face a mask of confusion and wariness as the unusual procession pulled into the farmyard. The moment Ethan stepped out of Megan's Jeep, he knew this conversation wouldn't be easy. What's going on? Jackson asked, his eyes tracking Sophia as she emerged from her vehicle, followed by a stone-faced security guard in a dark suit. Why is Maxwell Blackwood's daughter here? Gramps, we need to talk, Ethan said, climbing the porch steps. Blackwood's made an offer that might save the horses. Jackson's eyes narrowed. What kind of offer? Let's discuss it inside, Ethan suggested, glancing back at Sophia, who was taking in the modest farmhouse with undisguised curiosity. No, Jackson said firmly. Whatever Blackwood's offering, I want to hear it right here, right now. Ethan sighed, knowing his grandfather's pride would make this difficult. He's offering to buy our debt from the bank, stop the foreclosure. The horses would be safe. And what does he want in return? Jackson asked, his voice flat with suspicion. Half the property, the wooded acres bordering his estate, and he wants to make Sophia a partner in the rescue operation. Jackson's face flushed with anger. So that's his game. He couldn't get my land through a straight offer, so now he's using our misfortune to take half of it and control the rest. Absolutely not. Gramps, please, Ethan implored. The Slaughterhouse truck will be back tomorrow with all the proper documentation. We're out of options. There are always options that don't involve selling your soul to Maxwell Blackwood. Sophia, who had been hanging back, stepped forward. Mr. Miller, she said, her voice softer than Ethan had heard it before. I know my father can be difficult to deal with, but I promise you I genuinely care about what happens to these horses. Jackson regarded her with skepticism. No offense, young lady, but your father has been trying to get his hands on my property since he moved to this county. This is just another tactic. It's not like that, Sophia insisted. This was my idea. When I heard what was happening to your horses, I couldn't just stand by. And what do you know about rescue horses? Jackson challenged. These aren't your fancy show jumpers. These are animals that have been abused, neglected. They need specialized care, patience, understanding. Sophia didn't flinch under his scrutiny. I know I have a lot to learn, but I'm willing to learn it. And my involvement means these horses will be safe. Isn't that what matters most? Megan, who had been quietly observing, stepped in. Mr. Miller, maybe we should at least see the horses. Show Sophia what the rescue is really about. Jackson hesitated, looking between the three teenagers. Finally, he gave a curt nod. Fine, let's go to the barn, but I'm not agreeing to anything yet. As they walked toward the barn, the security guard following at a discreet distance, Ethan fell into step beside his grandfather. Gramps, I know this isn't ideal, but not now, Ethan, Jackson cut him off. Let's just show her the horses. The familiar smell of hay, leather, and horses greeted them as they entered the barn. The afternoon feeding was still a few hours away, but several horses nickered hopefully at their arrival. We currently have 12 horses, Ethan explained to Sophia as they moved down the center aisle. Some are here for rehabilitation and will eventually be adopted out. Others are permanent residents due to ongoing medical issues or behavioral challenges that make them unsuitable for adoption. Sophia moved slowly from stall to stall, taking time to greet each horse properly, her expression softening with each introduction. She seemed particularly taken with Phoenix, a chestnut gelding with burn scars along his neck and shoulders. one of the abuse cases they were fighting to protect. "What happened to him?" she asked quietly, extending her hand for the horse to sniff. "His previous owner used a blowtorch to punish him for knocking over a water trough," Ethan replied, the memory still making his stomach clench with anger. "He was rescued 6 months ago. The case is still going through the courts." Sophia's eyes widened in horror. "That's monstrous." "Unfortunately, it's not uncommon," Jackson said, his voice losing some of its edge as he watched her genuine reaction. "People can be cruel to animals, especially when those animals are seen as property rather than living beings." "And the others?" Sophia asked, moving to the next stall where Willow stood watching them curiously. For the next hour, Ethan and Jackson took turns telling the stories of each horse. Willow, abandoned when her elderly owner died. Clover, rescued from starvation. Shadow, another abuse case who'd been beaten so severely he was still wary of sudden movements. Daisy, the third horse involved in legal proceedings, rescued from a hoarder with 30 other animals. Throughout it all, Sophia listened intently, asking thoughtful questions about their care, rehabilitation, and future prospects. Even Jackson seemed grudgingly impressed by her genuine interest and respect for the animals. As they approached the last stall, which housed an elderly dappled gray named Whisper, Sophia paused. "She's beautiful," she said softly. Jackson's expression softened completely for the first time. "She was our first rescue, nearly 20 years ago. Found her tied to our gate one morning, half-starved and terrified of people. Took months before she'd let anyone touch her." "And now?" Sophia asked. As if in answer, Whisper stretched her neck over the stall door, gently nuzzling Jackson's shoulder. The old man smiled, reaching up to stroke her forelock with obvious affection. "Now she's family," he said simply. Sophia was quiet for a moment, watching the interaction between man and horse. Then she turned to face both Millers directly. "I understand why you're hesitant to accept my father's offer," she said. "But please believe me when I say I don't want to change what you've built here. I want to help preserve it." Jackson studied her, his expression unreadable. "Why? You have your imported competition horses, your ribbons and trophies. Why would you care about a bunch of rescue cases?" "Because they matter," Sophia replied without hesitation. "Because what you do here matters. I've spent my entire life in the equestrian world, and I've seen how horses are treated when they're no longer useful for their intended purpose. What you're doing here, it's important." A heavy silence fell over the barn, broken only by the occasional soft nicker or shifting of hooves on straw. "Gramps," Ethan said finally, "we need to decide soon. Blackwood said his offer expires at midnight, and the Slaughterhouse truck will be back tomorrow." Jackson sighed deeply, the weight of 20 years of work and love visible in the slump of his shoulders. "Let's go back to the house. We need to talk this through properly." As they walked back, Megan fell into step beside Ethan. "She really seems to care," she whispered, nodding toward Sophia, who was asking Jackson more questions about their feeding routines. "Yeah," Ethan agreed, surprised by the development. "I didn't expect that." Back at the house, they gathered around the kitchen table, a simple wooden piece that had been in the Miller family for generations. It looked even more worn and humble with Sophia sitting at it in her expensive riding clothes. "Let me see the exact terms of this offer," Jackson said, his voice resigned but determined. Sophia pulled out her phone. "My father had his assistant email me the details," she said, forwarding the message to Ethan. As Ethan scanned the document on his own phone, the full implications of Blackwood's offer became clearer. "It's basically what he said," he reported. "He'll pay off our debt completely, take ownership of the wooded 50 acres, and establish a formal partnership between us and Sophia for the rescue operation. With benchmarks," Jackson noted grimly. "The rescue has to become profitable within a year." "I can help with that," Sophia said quickly. My family has connections that could bring in donations, corporate sponsorships, and I have ideas for fundraising events that could generate significant income. Jackson looked skeptical. We've tried fundraisers before. They barely cover costs. No offense, Mr. Miller, but you haven't tried fundraisers with the Blackwood name attached, Sophia replied, a hint of her father's confidence showing through. I can bring in people who would pay thousands just to be seen at the right charity event. And what happens if we don't meet these benchmarks? Jackson asked. Ethan winced, knowing this was the hardest part. Blackwood can buy the remaining property at market value. So he gets everything he wanted in the first place, Jackson concluded bitterly, just delayed by a year. Not if we succeed, Ethan countered. If we make the rescue profitable, we keep the land and the horses stay safe. And we have a Blackwood looking over our shoulder for the rest of our lives. Sophia leaned forward, her expression earnest. Mr. Miller, I know you don't trust my father. You probably don't trust me either. But right now, we're the only chance these horses have. Tomorrow morning, they'll be loaded onto a truck bound for slaughter. Is your pride worth their lives? The question hung in the air, harsh but unavoidable. Jackson stared at the tabletop, the lines in his face seeming to deepen by the second. Gramps, Ethan said softly, I know this isn't what you wanted, but maybe it's what we need. Jackson looked up, his eyes moving from Ethan to Sophia, then finally to the window where the barn was visible in the distance. After what seemed like an eternity, he nodded once. For the horses, he said, his voice rough with emotion. But I have one condition of my own. What's that? Sophia asked. Whisper stays with me until her last day. No matter what happens with benchmarks or partnerships or anything else, she's not negotiable. Sophia nodded solemnly. I promise. She'll always be yours, Mr. Miller. Outside, thunder rumbled as another storm approached, but inside the kitchen of the Miller farmhouse, a fragile agreement had been reached, one that would change all their lives in ways none of them could yet imagine. The following morning dawned clear and crisp. The storms of the previous day washed away as if they'd never existed. Ethan rose before sunrise, as he did every day, and made his way to the barn for the morning feeding. The familiar routine was comforting, a moment of normalcy before everything changed. As he moved from stall to stall, measuring out grain and checking water buckets, he tried to process everything that had happened. By noon yesterday, he'd thought they would lose everything. By midnight, legal documents had been signed via courier, and Maxwell Blackwood officially owned half their land and was a partner in their rescue operation. Morning, Jackson called, entering the barn with a thermos of coffee. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes deeper than usual after a night of restless sleep. Morning, Gramps, Ethan replied, pausing to accept a mug of steaming coffee. How are you feeling about everything? Jackson sighed, leaning against a stall door. Like I made a deal with the devil. But the horses are safe, and that's what matters. As if on cue, the sound of vehicles approaching caught their attention. Ethan tensed, his first thought that the Slaughterhouse truck had returned anyway. Instead, they emerged from the barn to find two Blackwood security SUVs and Sophia's vehicle pulling into the yard. Little early for a social call, Jackson muttered. Sophia climbed out of her car dressed in work clothes, though her version of work clothes still looked expensive, with pristine jeans and a designer flannel shirt. Behind her, two security guards and a woman in a business suit emerged from the other vehicles. Good morning, Sophia called, approaching with a determined stride. I hope you don't mind the early arrival. I wanted to be here for morning feeding. Ethan glanced at his watch. We're almost done, actually. We start at 5:30. If Sophia was embarrassed by her late arrival, she didn't show it. I'll remember that for tomorrow. In the meantime, I'd like to introduce Julia Winters. She's my father's personal assistant and will be helping us implement some of the changes we discussed. The woman in the suit stepped forward, offering a professional smile. Mr. Miller, Ethan. A pleasure to meet you both. Mr. Blackwood has asked me to facilitate the transition and help establish the new business structure for the rescue. Jackson's expression hardened. We haven't even had breakfast yet, and already the changes are starting. Gramps, Ethan murmured, a gentle warning. Julia seemed unfazed by Jackson's response. I understand this is a significant adjustment, Mr. Miller. My role is simply to help ensure the rescue becomes sustainable, as outlined in the agreement. Perhaps we could begin with a tour of the facilities, so I can better understand your current operations? Before Jackson could respond, the rumble of another engine announced yet another arrival. This time it was the Westland meat processing truck, accompanied by a sheriff's department vehicle. Right on schedule, Ethan said grimly, checking his watch. Just like Blackwood predicted. Sophia stepped forward. Let me handle this. As the truck and patrol car parked, the same two men from the previous day emerged, looking confident and determined. The sheriff's deputy, a middle-aged man named Rodriguez, who had known the Millers for years, approached with obvious discomfort. Morning, Jackson, Ethan, he said, nodding to each. I'm afraid I'm here in an official capacity. These gentlemen have documentation for the seizure of livestock as part of a foreclosure proceeding. That won't be necessary, Deputy Rodriguez, Sophia interjected smoothly, stepping forward with the authoritative presence of someone accustomed to being listened to. The foreclosure has been resolved. The Miller property is now under new ownership. The deputy looked confused. I don't have any record of that. Julia moved forward, producing a folder of documents. These papers were filed electronically last night and should be in the county system. Maxwell Blackwood has acquired the debt and property rights. The horses are no longer subject to seizure. The taller man from Westland scowled. This is the first we're hearing of this. Perhaps you should check with your superiors before proceeding, Julia suggested mildly. I believe they'll confirm the situation has changed. While the deputy reviewed the documents, the Westland representative stepped aside for a heated phone conversation. Ethan watched them with a mixture of relief and apprehension. They looked angry, but more importantly, they looked defeated. After several minutes, the shorter man approached again. This isn't over, he said, his voice low with barely controlled anger. Mr. Ackerman doesn't appreciate last-minute changes to business arrangements. Your concerns have been noted, Julia replied coolly. However, the legal situation is quite clear. The horses remain on this property under the joint ownership of the Miller-Blackwood Partnership. With obvious reluctance, the men returned to their truck. Deputy Rodriguez handed the documents back to Julia with evident relief. Looks like everything's in order. Sorry for the disturbance, Jackson. As the vehicles departed, Ethan felt a weight lift from his shoulders. They're really gone, he said, almost unable to believe it. The horses are safe. For now, Jackson replied quietly. Sophia turned to them, her expression triumphant. I told you my father would handle it. Now shall we continue with the tour? We have a lot of work to do. The rest of the morning passed in a whirlwind of activity. Julia took detailed notes on every aspect of the rescue operation, from feeding schedules to veterinary care, adoption procedures to volunteer management. Her questions were precise and sometimes uncomfortably probing, especially when it came to financial matters. So you've been operating at a loss for how long? She asked as they sat at the kitchen table, looking through the rescue's sparse financial records. The rescue isn't about profit, Jackson replied defensively. It's about saving horses. I understand that, Mr. Miller, but under the new agreement, it needs to be both, Julia reminded him. We need to find ways to honor your mission while creating sustainable revenue streams. By mid-afternoon, Sophia had set up what she called a command center in the small office at the back of the barn, complete with a new laptop, printer, and various office supplies that must have cost more than the rescue spent on such things in a year. "I've already started designing a new website," she announced as Ethan finished the afternoon feeding. "And I've scheduled our first fundraising event for next month, a Save the Rescue gala at my parents' estate. We'll invite everyone who's anyone in the county." Ethan tried to share her enthusiasm, but couldn't help feeling overwhelmed by the pace of change. "That sounds ambitious." "We need to be ambitious if we're going to meet those benchmarks," Sophia replied, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "Oh, and I've arranged for a professional photographer to come tomorrow to take pictures of all the horses for the website and promotional materials." "Sophia," Ethan said hesitantly, "some of these horses are still recovering from trauma. They might not react well to strangers with camera equipment." She paused, looking up from the screen. "I hadn't thought of that. What do you suggest?" "Maybe I could take the photos. I'm not a professional, but I know the horses, what they're comfortable with." Sophia considered this, then nodded. "That makes sense. Do you have a decent camera?" "Just my phone." "That won't work for high-quality promotional images," she said, already typing again. "I'll have a professional camera delivered for you to use instead." "You don't need to." "It's an investment in the rescue's future," she cut him off. "Besides, you clearly know these horses better than anyone. Your perspective will be valuable." Ethan wasn't sure whether to be grateful for her acknowledgement of his expertise or annoyed at how easily she threw money at problems. Before he could decide, Megan arrived, looking curiously at the transformed barn office. "Wow," she said, taking in the new equipment. "Things change fast around here." "Megan," Sophia greeted her with surprising warmth. "Perfect timing. I wanted to talk to you about our volunteer program. Julia thinks we should formalize it, create proper schedules and training protocols." Megan raised an eyebrow at Ethan, who shrugged helplessly. "Our volunteer program is pretty much just Megan and a couple of kids from the 4-H club who come on weekends," he explained. "Exactly," Sophia said, undeterred. "We need to expand it. More volunteers means more help with the horses and more community engagement. Megan, would you be interested in helping coordinate this? You clearly know the operation well." Megan looked surprised at the offer. "I guess I could help. I've never coordinated anything like that before." "You'll be great," Sophia assured her, "and it would look excellent on college applications." As Sophia outlined her vision for the volunteer program, Ethan slipped outside for a moment of quiet. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the pastures. He could see his grandfather in the distance, sitting on the old bench by the paddock, where Whisper grazed peacefully. Everything was happening so fast. The rescue had been saved, yes, but at what cost? The Blackwood influence was already changing things, and it had only been one day. What would the place look like in a week? A month? Would it still be the same rescue he'd grown up loving, or would it become something unrecognizable? "You okay?" Megan asked, joining him outside. "Just processing," he replied. "Yesterday we were about to lose everything. Today we have a Blackwood as a partner and fancy new equipment and fundraising galas." Megan nudged his shoulder gently. "But the horses are safe. That's what matters, right?" "Yeah," Ethan agreed, watching as Whisper ambled over to his grandfather, seeking attention. "That's what matters." But as the sun sank lower on their first day under the new arrangement, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a much bigger change, one that would test them all in ways they couldn't yet imagine. Over the next 2 weeks, the Miller Horse Rescue transformed at a dizzying pace. New fencing appeared around the pastures. The barn received a fresh coat of paint, and a sleek sign featuring an artistic silhouette of a horse replaced the hand-carved wooden one that had stood at the entrance for 20 years. Ethan worked from sunrise to sunset, trying to maintain the horses' routines amid the constant disruptions. Construction crews arrived without warning to build a proper parking area. Landscapers reshaped the front yard, marketing consultants measured the barn for promotional banners. Through it all, Sophia directed operations with relentless efficiency, consulting Ethan and Jackson only when absolutely necessary. "Gramps, have you seen the new website?" Ethan asked one evening, finding his grandfather at the kitchen table, papers spread before him. Jackson looked up, fatigue evident in his eyes. "Can't say that I have. Been too busy trying to make sense of these new care protocols," Julia dropped off. "Apparently, we've been doing everything wrong for 20 years. Ethan pulled up the site on his phone and handed it to Jackson. The old, basic web page had been replaced with a sleek, professional site featuring the photos Ethan had taken with the expensive camera Sophia had provided. The horses' stories were told with elegant typography and emotional appeals. A prominent Donate Now button appeared on every page. "It's fancy, I'll give them that," Jackson admitted, scrolling through the site. "But where are we in all this? There's barely a mention of how the rescue started, what we've built." Ethan had noticed the same thing. The About Us page highlighted the new Miller-Blackwood partnership, but contained only a brief paragraph about the rescue's 20-year history. "I'll talk to Sophia about it," Ethan promised, though he wasn't sure how much good it would do. Every suggestion he'd made over the past 2 weeks had been politely acknowledged and then mostly ignored. The following morning, Ethan found Sophia in the new office space that had been constructed at the back of the barn, another improvement that had appeared without discussion. "Morning," he greeted her, trying to keep his tone neutral. "Got a minute to talk about the website?" Sophia looked up from her laptop, her expression brightening. "The website? Isn't it amazing? We've already received 12 donation inquiries since it went live yesterday." "It looks great," Ethan agreed cautiously. "But Gramps and I noticed that the history of the rescue, what we've built over 20 years, is barely mentioned." Sophia's smile faltered slightly. "Oh, that. Julia thought it would be best to focus on the future rather than the past. People respond better to forward-looking messaging." "But the past is important," Ethan insisted. "It's who we are, what makes this place special." Sophia sighed, closing her laptop. "Ethan, I understand your attachment to the rescue's history, but we need to be strategic about our messaging if we're going to meet those benchmarks. The simple fact is that struggling family rescue doesn't attract major donors. Innovative partnership with cutting-edge facilities does." "It feels like we're erasing what my grandfather built," Ethan said, trying to keep the frustration from his voice. "We're not erasing anything," Sophia countered. "We're building on it, making it sustainable." She glanced at her watch. "I need to run. The event planner is coming to discuss the gala. We can talk more about this later, okay?" Before Ethan could respond, she was already gathering her things, effectively ending the conversation. Outside, he found Megan working with a small group of new volunteers, college students recruited through Sophia's connections at the local university. "How's it going?" he asked as Megan instructed a nervous-looking young woman on proper grooming techniques. "Pretty good," Megan replied with forced cheerfulness. "These guys are quick learners." When the volunteers moved on to their next task, Megan pulled Ethan aside. "It's a lot," she admitted quietly. "Sophia's got me coordinating 15 new volunteers, creating training materials, setting up a scheduling system. I feel like I'm running a business, not helping at a horse rescue." "Tell me about it," Ethan sighed. "Everything's changing so fast. Half the time I don't recognize the place anymore." "But the horses seem okay, right?" Megan asked. "That's the important thing." Ethan glanced toward the pasture where several horses grazed peacefully. "They're adjusting. Change is harder on some than others. Phoenix still gets nervous with all the new people, but we're managing." A sleek black car pulled into the new parking area, and a woman in a stylish pantsuit emerged, carrying a portfolio. "That must be the event planner," Ethan said. "Better go help Sophia. She's been stressing about this gala for days." The gala, scheduled for the following weekend, had become the center of Sophia's attention. Every conversation eventually circled back to catering choices, decorations, or the guest list, which apparently included several state politicians and local celebrities. The pressure to make it a success was intense. Maxwell Blackwood had made it clear that he expected significant donations to result from the event. As Ethan headed toward the barn, his phone buzzed with a text from his grandfather. "Need you at the house. Visitor." Inside the kitchen, Ethan found Jackson sitting across from a man in a business suit he didn't recognize. "Ethan, this is Mr. Ackerman," Jackson said, his expression unreadable. "He'd like to speak with us." Richard Ackerman, the name clicked immediately. The owner of Westland Meat Processing and its parent company, Ackerman Holdings. "Mr. Miller," Ackerman greeted him with a nod. He was a lean, tanned man in his 50s with silver hair and the confident posture of someone used to getting his way. "I was just explaining to your grandfather that I believe we got off on the wrong foot." Ethan remained standing, wary of the man's presence. "You tried to send our horses to slaughter." "A unfortunate misunderstanding," Ackerman replied smoothly. "Had I known the personal connection your family had to those animals, I would have handled things differently." "What do you want, Mr. Ackerman?" Ethan asked bluntly. The man smiled, apparently appreciating Ethan's directness. "I want to make things right, and perhaps find a mutually beneficial arrangement." "What kind of arrangement?" Jackson asked. "I understand you're now in partnership with Maxwell Blackwood," Ackerman continued. "An interesting development, considering the history between our companies." "What history?" Ethan asked. Ackerman raised an eyebrow. "He didn't tell you? Blackwood Industries has been trying to acquire Ackerman Holdings for years. Your little rescue has become a pawn in a much larger game, I'm afraid." Ethan exchanged a glance with his grandfather. This was news to both of them. "Still doesn't explain why you're here," Jackson pointed out. "I'm here to make you an offer," Ackerman said, leaning forward. "I will donate $100,000 to your rescue operation. In return, all I ask is that you consider terminating your partnership with Blackwood." The amount made Ethan's head spin. It was more than enough to clear their debt and operate the rescue comfortably for at least a year. "Why would you do that?" he asked suspiciously. "Let's just say I'd prefer not to have Blackwood involved in yet another local enterprise," Ackerman replied. "His influence in this county is becoming concerning." Jackson's eyes narrowed. "So this is about your business rivalry, not our horses." "Does it matter?" Ackerman asked with a shrug. "You get the money you need without Blackwood controlling your operation. I get the satisfaction of thwarting his expansion. Everyone wins." "Except we already signed a contract with Blackwood," Ethan pointed out. "We can't just back out." "Contracts can be renegotiated," Ackerman said dismissively. "I have excellent lawyers." Jackson stood up abruptly. "I think you should leave, Mr. Ackerman. We're not interested in getting caught in the middle of whatever game you and Blackwood are playing." Ackerman remained seated, his expression hardening slightly. "Consider carefully before you refuse. Blackwood didn't partner with you out of the goodness of his heart. There's always an angle with him." "As opposed to your completely selfless offer," Ethan countered. Ackerman finally rose, straightening his suit jacket. "At least I'm transparent about my motivations. Can Blackwood say the same?" He placed a business card on the table. "My offer stands for 48 hours. After that, well, partnerships can be complicated things, full of unexpected challenges." The threat, though veiled, was unmistakable. After Ackerman left, Ethan and Jackson sat in troubled silence. "What do you think he meant about Blackwood having an angle?" Ethan finally asked. Jackson shook his head. "I don't know, but I don't like being caught between two billionaires with agendas. We need to talk to Sophia, find out what she knows about this rivalry." Finding Sophia proved difficult. She was deep in conversation with the event planner, surrounded by fabric swatches and sample centerpieces. "We need to talk," Ethan interrupted. It's important." Sophia looked annoyed at the interruption, but must have seen something in Ethan's expression. "Give me 5 minutes to wrap this up." When she finally joined them in the kitchen, Ethan relayed the details of Ackerman's visit. Her face paled visibly as he mentioned the rivalry between the two companies. "You need to tell my father about this immediately," she said, reaching for her phone. "First, we need answers," Jackson insisted. "What's really going on between your father and Ackerman? Why are they using our rescue as a battlefield?" Sophia hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "It's complicated." "Uncomplicated," Jackson demanded. "My father and Ackerman have been business rivals for years," Sophia admitted. "But it became personal when Ackerman tried to develop land adjacent to our estate for a meat processing plant. My father blocked it through zoning regulations." "And our farm?" Ethan pressed. "Where do we fit in?" Sophia looked down at her hands. "Your property is strategically located. The wooded acres my father acquired provide a buffer zone that makes it even more difficult for Ackerman to expand his operations in this area." The realization hit Ethan like a physical blow. So this was never about saving horses. It was about real estate and corporate rivalry. "No," Sophia protested, looking genuinely distressed. "I meant everything I said about wanting to help the horses. My father's motivations might be more complex, but mine aren't." Jackson stood up, his expression grim. "Complex is a polite word for it. Manipulative might be more accurate." "What are we going to do?" Ethan asked. "I don't know," Jackson replied. "But one thing's for sure, we need to be very careful about who we trust from now on." The evening before the gala, Ethan sat on the porch steps, staring out at the rescue that no longer felt entirely like home. Lights blazed in the barn, where a team of decorators was transforming the space for tomorrow's event. The familiar smells of hay and horses were masked by fresh paint and flowers that had arrived by the truckload throughout the day. His phone vibrated with another text from Sophia. "Need your input on final horse arrangements for tomorrow. Please come to barn ASAP." For the past 3 days since Ackerman's visit, Ethan had been caught in an impossible position. Maxwell Blackwood, summoned by Sophia's urgent call, had arrived within hours of learning about Ackerman's offer. His response had been swift and calculated. "Ackerman is desperate," Blackwood had explained, seated in the miller's modest living room, like a king granting an audience. "This property is the final piece he needs for his expansion plans. Without it, his new processing facility can't meet environmental runoff regulations." "So it is about the land," Jackson had said, his suspicion confirmed. "Of course it's about the land," Blackwood replied with surprising candor. "It's always about the land. But that doesn't mean we can't achieve multiple objectives. Your horses remain safe, your rescue continues with improved facilities, and Ackerman's ecologically questionable operation remains blocked." When Jackson pressed about why these details hadn't been disclosed initially, Blackwood had merely shrugged. "Would it have changed your decision? Your options were foreclosure or partnership. The underlying corporate dynamics were irrelevant to that choice." Now, 3 days later, Ethan still wasn't sure where they stood. The partnership with Blackwood continued, the gala preparations proceeded at a frantic pace, and Ackerman's offer remained on the table, the 48-hour deadline extended by a terse email. "My offer stands until after your event. Choose wisely." With a sigh, Ethan pulled himself to his feet and headed toward the barn. Inside, he barely recognized the space. The central aisle had been transformed with twinkling lights, elegant drapes, and floral arrangements. Tables covered in fine linens stood where hay bales normally sat. Only the soft nickering of horses from the stalls provided any sense of familiarity. "There you are," Sophia called, waving him over to where she stood with the designer and the event planner. "We need to decide which horses to feature during the presentation." "Feature?" Ethan asked warily. "For the fundraising appeal," Sophia explained. We'll bring out 3 horses to represent the rescue's work while I give my speech. I'm thinking Phoenix, for his abuse survival story, Clover, because she's young and pretty, and maybe Shadow, since his recovery shows our rehabilitation success. Ethan felt a knot form in his stomach. Sophia, Phoenix, and Shadow are still easily spooked. Putting them in the middle of a party with dozens of strangers, bright lights, and loud music would be traumatic for them. But their stories are so compelling, the event planner interjected. The donors need to see the actual horses they're helping. What about Willow instead? Ethan suggested. She's calm in new situations, good with strangers. She doesn't have the same emotional impact, Sophia argued. Her story isn't as dramatic. These aren't props for a fundraising pitch, Ethan said, his frustration finally boiling over. They're living creatures with real trauma. Using Phoenix and Shadow this way would set back months of rehabilitation work. The designer and event planner exchanged uncomfortable glances. Maybe we should give you 2 a moment, the event planner murmured, and they quickly made themselves scarce. Sophia crossed her arms, her expression hardening. This gala has to succeed, Ethan. My father is expecting results. And what about the horses? Isn't their well-being supposed to be our priority? Their well-being depends on this rescue surviving financially, Sophia countered. One uncomfortable evening could secure their future for years. Ethan took a deep breath, trying to find a compromise. What if we bring out Willow during your speech, and then invite guests to view the other horses in their stalls afterward? That way people can still see them, but in a controlled environment that won't traumatize them. Sophia considered this, then slowly nodded. That could work. We could set up placards with their stories near each stall, make it an educational tour. Exactly, Ethan said, relieved she was listening. People might even connect more with the horses if they see them in their natural environment. As they worked out the details, Ethan felt a small sense of victory. It was the first time since the partnership began that one of his suggestions hadn't been immediately overruled or modified beyond recognition. Later that evening, as Ethan finished the night check on the horses, he found Jackson sitting on a hay bale in the one corner of the barn, not yet transformed by decorations. Can't even recognize the place, his grandfather muttered, looking around at the party preparations. It's just for one night, Ethan said, though he shared the sentiment. Is it? Jackson asked. Sometimes I wonder if this is just the beginning. Next thing you know, they'll be turning the whole rescue into some fancy equestrian center with no room for broken-down cases like our Phoenix or Old Whisper. I won't let that happen, Ethan promised, sitting beside his grandfather. Jackson sighed heavily. I'm not sure we have much say in it anymore, son. Once you invite someone like Blackwood in, things have a way of changing according to his vision, not yours. We still have a partnership agreement, 50-50 decisions. On paper, maybe, but money talks louder than paperwork. Jackson reached into his pocket and pulled out Ackerman's business card. Been thinking about his offer. Ethan stared at his grandfather in surprise. You can't be serious. After everything we know about him? I'm not saying I trust him, Jackson clarified. But at least with his money, we wouldn't be tied to anyone's control. We could pay off Blackwood, regain full ownership of the rescue. And then what happens when Ackerman expects us to sell him the land for his processing plant? You think he's just giving us that money out of the goodness of his heart? Jackson shook his head. No, I don't. But at least then we'd be dealing with a straightforward business transaction, not this partnership that's slowly taking over everything we built. I don't think it's that simple, Gramps. Nothing ever is. Jackson pocketed the card again. Just thinking out loud. Don't mind me. As Ethan continued his rounds, checking each horse one last time for the night, he couldn't shake his grandfather's words. The rescue had been saved, but at what cost? And with 2 powerful men using it as a pawn in their corporate chess match. How long before the horses themselves became secondary to larger agendas? The next morning dawned bright and clear, perfect weather for the gala. Ethan had barely slept, his mind racing with concerns about the event, the horses, and the future of the rescue. He went through his morning routine mechanically, trying to maintain normalcy for the horses amid the chaos of last-minute preparations. By noon, the transformation was complete. The barn looked like something out of a high-end magazine, barely recognizable as a working horse rescue. Staff in black uniforms began arriving, setting up bars and food stations under the direction of a catering manager with a clipboard and a permanent frown. "There you are," Sophia called, hurrying toward him with a garment bag. "This is for you. For tonight." Ethan took the bag cautiously. "What is it?" "Your suit," she replied, as if it were obvious. "You can't wear jeans and a t-shirt to the gala." Opening the bag, Ethan found an expensive-looking navy suit that probably cost more than his entire wardrobe combined. "Sophia, this is too much." "It's necessary," she insisted. "You're representing the rescue tonight. First impressions matter to these donors." Before he could argue further, her attention was diverted by a crisis with the lighting setup, and she rushed off, already on her phone calling for technical support. Megan arrived shortly after, equally wide-eyed at the transformation. "Whoa," she said, taking in the elaborate decorations. "This doesn't even look like the same place." "Tell me about it," Ethan agreed. "Apparently I don't look the part either." He held up the garment bag. "Fancy," Megan observed with a small smile. "She got me one too. A dress. I've never worn anything that expensive in my life." As the afternoon progressed, Ethan found himself increasingly relegated to the sidelines. Sophia and her team of professionals handled every aspect of the event preparation with military precision, needing him only to answer occasional questions about the horses. By early evening, guests began to arrive. Men in tailored suits and women in cocktail dresses handed champagne as they entered the transformed barn. Ethan, uncomfortable in his new suit, stood awkwardly near the entrance, watching as Maxwell Blackwood himself greeted each arrival with practiced charm. "There's the hero of the hour," Blackwood said as Ethan approached, clapping him on the shoulder with surprising warmth. "The young man who refused to let these magnificent animals go to slaughter." Several guests turned to look at Ethan with interest, and he felt his face grow warm with embarrassment. "It was a team effort," he managed. "Modesty," Blackwood said to the surrounding guests. "Refreshing in someone so young. But make no mistake, without Ethan's determination, this rescue wouldn't exist today." As Blackwood continued singing his praises to the assembled donors, Ethan caught sight of his grandfather entering the barn, looking profoundly uncomfortable in a suit that had probably last been worn to a funeral a decade ago. But it wasn't Jackson's attire that caught Ethan's attention. It was the man, following close behind him. Richard Ackerman had come to the gala, and judging by the sudden tension in Maxwell Blackwood's posture, his presence was neither expected nor welcome. The elegant chatter in the barn dropped to a murmur as Richard Ackerman made his way through the crowd, Jackson following with obvious discomfort. Maxwell Blackwood's pleasant smile remained fixed in place, but his eyes hardened to chips of ice. "Ackerman," he said coolly, "I don't recall seeing your name on the guest list." "Jackson was kind enough to invite me," Ackerman replied with an easy confidence that matched Blackwood's. "After all, I'm a potential major donor to this worthy cause." Sophia appeared at her father's side, her expression a mixture of confusion and alarm. "Mr. Miller, you invited him?" Jackson squared his shoulders, looking more like his old self, despite the ill-fitting suit. "It's still partly my rescue, isn't it? Thought all potential donors should be welcome." Ethan stared at his grandfather in disbelief. This was a deliberate move, a chess piece placed with clear intent, but to what end? "Of course," Blackwood recovered smoothly, his public persona reasserting itself. "All support is appreciated, especially for such a worthy cause. He turned to the gathered guests. Please enjoy the evening. The presentation will begin in 30 minutes. As the guests dispersed toward the bar and hors d'oeuvres, Blackwood gripped Ethan's arm and pulled him aside, Sophia and Jackson following. In a quiet corner partially concealed by one of the elaborate floral arrangements, Blackwood's facade dropped. "What game are you playing, Jackson?" he demanded, his voice low but intense. "No game," Jackson replied steadily. "Just exploring all our options." "Options?" Sophia hissed. "He tried to send your horses to slaughter." "And your father only saved them to block his business expansion," Jackson countered. "Seems to me both of you are using our rescue for your own purposes." Ethan stepped between them, feeling the tension escalate. "This isn't the time or place. We have guests." "Your grandfather has made a grave miscalculation." Blackwood cut him off. "Ackerman isn't here to donate. He's here to disrupt, to create the impression of instability in our partnership." "You don't know that," Jackson argued. "I've been dealing with Richard Ackerman for 15 years, Blackwood replied coldly. "I know exactly how he operates. By inviting him here, you've potentially undermined everything we've built." Sophia looked close to tears, her carefully orchestrated event threatening to unravel. "We need to ask him to leave." "And create a scene?" Ethan shook his head. "That would just make things worse. We need to proceed as planned, show a united front." Blackwood studied Ethan with new interest, as if reassessing him. After a moment, he nodded once. "The boy's right. We continue as planned. Sophia, you'll give your presentation exactly as rehearsed. Jackson, you'll say nothing about Ackerman's offer or any disagreements within our partnership. Is that clear?" Jackson bristled at being ordered around, but gave a grudging nod. "Ethan," Blackwood continued, "stay close to Ackerman. Be polite, but monitor his interactions with our guests. I want to know who he speaks with and what he says." "I'm not a spy," Ethan protested. "No, you're a partner protecting your investment," Blackwood corrected. "Just as I am." As they dispersed back into the crowd, Ethan caught sight of Megan watching from nearby, concern evident in her expression. She'd changed into the dress Sophia had provided, a simple but elegant dark green that complemented her complexion. He made his way to her side. "What was that about?" she whispered. "And why is the Slaughterhouse guy here?" "Gramps invited him," Ethan replied quietly. "It's complicated." "Everything's complicated lately," Megan observed, accepting a glass of sparkling water from a passing server. "This whole event feels surreal. Half these people probably haven't been within 10 feet of a horse in their lives, yet they're here in designer clothes, drinking champagne in a barn." Despite the tension, Ethan smiled at her assessment. "At least the donations will help the horses, regardless of everyone's motives." "True," Megan conceded. "Speaking of which, where's your grandfather going with Ackerman?" Ethan turned to see Jackson leading Ackerman toward the back of the barn, away from the main event area. "I'd better follow them," he said, handing Megan his untouched glass of sparkling cider. "Keep an eye on Sophia. She looks like she might snap at any moment." Megan nodded, and Ethan moved through the crowd, trying to appear casual as he followed his grandfather and Ackerman. They disappeared through a side door that led to the small paddock area where Whisper was kept, separated from the main activities due to her age and temperament. Outside, the evening air was cool and refreshing after the perfumed warmth of the crowded barn. Ethan hung back, slipping into the shadows of a nearby equipment shed where he could observe without being seen. Jackson stood beside Whisper's paddock, one hand resting on the old mare's neck as she gently nuzzled his shoulder. Ackerman watched the interaction with what appeared to be genuine interest. "She was the first, you said?" Ackerman asked, his voice carrying in the quiet evening. 20 years ago, Jackson confirmed. "Found her tied to my gate, half-starved and terrified. Previous owner had moved away and just left her behind like she was trash, not a living creature. And that's when you decided to start the rescue? Jackson nodded, still stroking Whisper's gray muzzle. Couldn't turn her away. Then word got around that I'd take in unwanted horses, and more started showing up. Before I knew it, I was running a rescue. Ackerman stepped closer, cautiously extending a hand toward Whisper, who regarded him with wise, wary eyes. May I? Let her sniff you first, Jackson instructed. She needs to decide if she trusts you. Ethan watched in surprise as the ruthless businessman patiently stood still, allowing the elderly mare to investigate his scent before gently touching her neck. My grandfather had a farm, Ackerman said quietly, stroking Whisper's coat. Nothing fancy, just a small operation in Kansas. Had an old mare named Betsy that looked a lot like this one. Used to follow me around like a dog when I visited in the summers. The vulnerability in the man's voice caught Ethan off guard. This wasn't the calculated businessman who had threatened them just days ago. What happened to the farm? Jackson asked. Progress, Ackerman replied with a hint of bitterness. Developers wanted the land for a shopping center. Taxes were high, profits were low. He couldn't hold out. So you understand what it means to lose something you love, to so-called progress, Jackson observed. Ackerman's hand stilled on Whisper's neck. Is that why you invited me tonight? To make me see the parallel? Partly, Jackson admitted. But also because I wanted to understand what you're really after. Blackwood says it's just the land for your expansion, but I think there's more to it. Ackerman was quiet for a long moment, still gently stroking Whisper. Blackwood blocked my processing plant expansion through his connections on the zoning board. It wasn't about environmental concerns. It was about keeping me from competing with one of his portfolio companies that's moving into food processing. So this is personal, Jackson concluded. It's business, Ackerman corrected. But yes, there's a personal element. Blackwood has systematically worked to undermine my operations in this county for years. Your property became strategically important to both of us. And the horses? Jackson pressed. Were they just collateral damage in your corporate war? Ackerman finally turned to face Jackson directly. I didn't know about the rescue aspect when I initiated the foreclosure proceedings. I was focused on the land. Once I learned, I should have approached differently, and for that, I apologize. From his hiding place, Ethan felt his perception of the situation shifting. Neither Blackwood nor Ackerman was entirely villain or hero, just businessmen with competing interests who'd entangled the rescue in their rivalry. Your offer still stands? Jackson asked. The 100,000, no strings attached? It does, Ackerman confirmed. Though I won't pretend there aren't advantages for me if you end your partnership with Blackwood. And if we don't? Ackerman smiled slightly. Then I donate a more modest sum tonight like any other guest, and find another way to outmaneuver Blackwood. A soft cough from behind made Ethan jump. He turned to find Sophia standing there, her expression unreadable in the dim light. The presentation is about to begin, she said, her voice carrying enough to alert Jackson and Ackerman to their presence. We need you both inside. Jackson nodded, giving Whisper one last pat before heading toward them. Ackerman followed, pausing briefly as he passed Ethan. Eavesdropping is generally considered rude, he said quietly. But in this case, I'm glad you heard. Sometimes understanding comes from unexpected places. Inside, the barn had been transformed yet again. The central area was now cleared, with guests gathered in a semicircle. Sophia took her position in the center, a spotlight illuminating her as she began her carefully rehearsed presentation about the rescue's mission and future plans. Ethan found himself standing between Blackwood and Ackerman, acutely aware of the tension radiating from both men. As Willow was led out to appreciative murmurs from the crowd, he noticed his grandfather slipping away from the main group, heading toward the farmhouse. Something was happening. some decision being made that Ethan wasn't privy to. The realization both frustrated and worried him. This was his future too, his horses, his home. And now, Sophia was saying, her voice clear and confident, I'd like to invite you all to meet some of our other rescues in their stalls, where volunteers can tell you more about their individual stories and needs. As the crowd dispersed for the guided tour, Ethan made his decision. Whatever his grandfather was planning, he needed to be part of it. Slipping away from the two businessmen, he followed Jackson's path to the farmhouse, determined to understand what was happening before it was too late to have any say in the outcome. Behind him, he could hear Sophia continuing to charm the donors, Megan patiently explaining Phoenix's history to an elderly couple, and the gentle murmur of guests moving through the transformed barn. But ahead, in the dimly lit farmhouse, his grandfather was making decisions that could change everything, and Ethan refused to be left out of them any longer. Ethan found his grandfather in the kitchen, hunched over the old desktop computer that normally gathered dust in the corner. The blue light from the screen illuminated Jackson's furrowed brow as he scrolled through what appeared to be legal documents. "Gramps?" Ethan called softly, closing the door behind him. "What are you doing?" Jackson startled slightly, then relaxed when he saw it was Ethan. "Looking over our options," he replied, gesturing for Ethan to join him. "Been thinking about this all wrong." Ethan pulled up a chair, loosening his tie as he sat down. The suit, though perfectly tailored, felt constricting after a lifetime of worn jeans and flannel shirts. "What do you mean?" "Been thinking this was a simple choice between Blackwood and Ackerman," Jackson explained, his voice weary but determined. "But maybe there's a third way." "What third way? We've tried everything." Jackson pointed to the screen where an email from their lawyer was displayed. "Called Henry this morning. Asked him about the possibility of forming a non-profit organization, a proper 501c3, for the rescue." Ethan skimmed the email, trying to make sense of the legal terminology. "How does that help us? We still need the money to pay off Blackwood." "Ackerman's money," Jackson clarified. "But instead of using it to buy out Blackwood directly, we established the rescue as an independent non-profit. Ackerman's donation goes to the organization, not to us personally. We use it as leverage to renegotiate with Blackwood." "You think Blackwood would agree to that?" "If we structure it right, he might not have a choice." Jackson clicked to another document. "This is a draft of Articles of Incorporation Henry sent over. Lists you, me, and Megan as the founding board members. We could add others. Maybe that vet from the university who's helped us pro bono, or the retired judge who adopted Sunflower last year." "What about Sophia?" Ethan asked, feeling a twist of guilt at the idea of excluding her after all her work. Jackson frowned. "That's the complicated part. I don't know if we can trust her not to be her father's proxy, but I don't want to cut her out completely." "She really does care about the horses," Ethan said quietly. "I believe that much." "Maybe," Jackson conceded. "But caring isn't the same as putting their interests first when it conflicts with her father's agenda." Ethan stood up, pacing the small kitchen as he processed the implications. "So what's the actual plan here? We form a non-profit. Then what?" "We accept Ackerman's donation to the non-profit, not to us personally. That gives us the capital to approach Blackwood with a buyout offer for his interest in the rescue operation, but not for the land he already purchased. He keeps the wooded acres he wanted. We keep the rescue independent." "And you think he'll agree to this? Just walk away from the partnership?" "With the right incentives and enough public pressure, yes," Jackson replied, determination hardening his voice. "Blackwood cares about his image. If backing out gracefully makes him look magnanimous while still achieving his primary goal of blocking Ackerman's expansion, he might go for it." Ethan sat back down, his mind racing. It was a bold plan, maybe even a good one, but also fraught with risk. "Have you discussed this with Ackerman?" Would he be willing to donate to a non-profit instead of paying us directly? Not yet, Jackson admitted. Wanted to run it by you first. This affects your future more than mine, Ethan. The rescue will be yours long after I'm gone. The weight of that responsibility settled on Ethan's shoulders. At 17, he'd never expected to be making decisions that would shape not just his future, but the futures of 12 dependent animals and, potentially, the rescue for years to come. I'm with you, Gramps, he said finally. But we need to be transparent about this. No more secret meetings or backdoor deals. We should talk to both Blackwood and Ackerman together, lay everything out in the open. Jackson looked skeptical. You think they'd agree to that? They're both here tonight, surrounded by potential donors and community members. Neither one wants to look like the bad guy. It might be our best chance to get them to listen. Before Jackson could respond, the kitchen door opened, and Sophia burst in, her face flushed with a mixture of excitement and stress. There you are. We've already raised over $70,000 in pledges, and the silent auction hasn't even closed yet. Her expression faltered as she took in the scene. Ethan and Jackson hunched over legal documents, clearly deep in serious discussion. What's going on? Ethan exchanged a glance with his grandfather, then made a decision. We're considering forming a non-profit for the rescue, he said, choosing honesty over evasion. Make it independent of both Blackwood and Ackerman. Sophia's enthusiasm evaporated instantly. What? Why would you? Did Ackerman put you up to this? It was my idea, Jackson said firmly. Been thinking about it for a while. Tonight just clarified things. But the partnership, all the work we've done. Sophia looked genuinely hurt, which made Ethan's next words even harder. The partnership was never about the horses, Sophia. It was about your father blocking Ackerman's expansion plans. You might care about the rescue, but he doesn't. That's not true, she protested, though with less conviction than Ethan expected. He invested in the rescue, provided resources, expertise. To control it, Jackson interrupted gently, to ensure his land interests were protected. There's nothing wrong with that from a business perspective, but let's not pretend it was philanthropy. Sophia fell silent, the truth of his words clearly hitting home. After a moment, she asked in a smaller voice, Where does this leave me? I've put everything into making the gala a success, into improving the rescue's operations. That's up to you, Ethan replied. If you genuinely care about the horses and the rescue's mission, there could be a place for you in the non-profit, but it would be because of your commitment to the animals, not because of your father's business interests. Something shifted in Sophia's expression, a complex mixture of realization, hurt, and perhaps a hint of relief. You think I've just been my father's puppet this whole time? No, Ethan said firmly. I think you care about the horses, but have been caught between that genuine concern and loyalty to your father. It's an impossible position. Sophia moved to the window, staring out at the barn where the elegant event continued without her. The lights strung around the entrance twinkled like stars against the darkening sky. He'll never agree to it, she said finally. My father doesn't back out of deals, especially not when they involve Ackerman. He might, Ethan suggested, if the alternative is worse publicity than the goodwill he'd get from donating his interest to a worthy non-profit. Sophia turned back to them, a hint of admiration in her eyes. That's actually pretty shrewd, but you'd need significant leverage to make him consider it. That's where Ackerman comes in, Jackson explained. His donation would give the non-profit the capital to negotiate from a position of strength. And you think Ackerman will agree to donate to a non-profit with no guarantee of getting the land he wants? Sophia looked skeptical. We think he might, if it means disrupting Blackwood's plans and generating positive publicity for himself, Ethan replied. It's not ideal for him, but it's better than Blackwood maintaining control. Sophia was quiet for a long moment, clearly processing everything. What do you need from me? she finally asked. The question took Ethan by surprise. He'd expected resistance, argument, maybe even a threat to tell her father immediately. Instead, she seemed to be offering help. "You're serious?" he asked cautiously. "The rescue deserves to be about the horses, not about corporate rivalries," she said, her voice stronger now. "I've learned a lot these past few weeks. About the animals, about what your grandfather has built here, about you." She looked directly at Ethan. "If you're brave enough to stand up to both my father and Ackerman, the least I can do is help." Jackson looked between the two teenagers, a mixture of pride and concern on his weathered face. "This won't be easy. We're asking two powerful men to change course, to accept a solution neither of them proposed." "Then we need to make it their idea," Sophia said, a hint of her usual confidence returning. "Or at least make them think it is." "How do we do that?" Ethan asked. "By understanding what they really want," she replied. "My father wants the land buffer and the public relations win. Ackerman wants to thwart my father and possibly rehabilitate his image after the Slaughterhouse controversy. The non-profit could provide elements of both." "So what's our next move?" Jackson asked, looking between the two teenagers. "We need to get them both in a room away from the crowd," Sophia decided. "I can make that happen. Then we present the non-profit concept as a win-win solution." Ethan nodded slowly, hope beginning to build in his chest for the first time in weeks. "It might actually work." "It has to," Jackson said, rising from his chair with renewed determination. "For the horses." "For the horses," Sophia and Ethan echoed in unison. As they prepared to return to the gala, Ethan caught Sophia's arm gently. "Thank you," he said simply. "For understanding. For helping." She offered a small, genuine smile, not the polished one she used with donors, but something more real. "Sometimes the right path isn't the easiest one. My father taught me that, though I'm not sure this is what he had in mind." Outside, the spring night had settled fully over the farm, stars emerging in the clear sky. The sounds of the gala drifted from the barn, laughter, music, the gentle murmur of conversation. Somewhere in that elegant crowd, two powerful men continued their years-long rivalry, unaware that three unlikely allies were about to propose a solution neither had anticipated. As they walked back toward the light and noise, Ethan felt a strange sense of calm. Whatever happened next, he was fighting for something that mattered, not just for his family's legacy or his own future, but for 12 animals who depended on him to be their voice, their advocate, their protector. It was time to bring everything into the light and let the truth finally lead the way forward. The library of the Blackwood estate was designed to intimidate. Walls of leather-bound books, furniture that probably cost more than the entire Miller farm, and a massive oak desk that positioned Maxwell Blackwood like a judge presiding over a courtroom. Richard Ackerman sat opposite, appearing equally commanding in his tailored suit, while Ethan, Jackson, Sophia, and Megan occupied the middle ground between these two titans of industry. It had taken 3 days since the gala to arrange this meeting. 3 days of careful negotiation, legal consultations, and preparation. The gala itself had been a spectacular success financially, raising over $100,000 in pledges, money that now sat in limbo while the rescue's future remained uncertain. "Let me make sure I understand what you're proposing," Blackwood said, his tone measured but skeptical. "You want to dissolve our partnership agreement, create an independent non-profit organization to run the rescue, and have me donate my interest in the operation while retaining ownership of the wooded acres." "That's correct," Jackson confirmed. The Miller Blackwood Horse Rescue would become the New Beginnings Equine Sanctuary, a 501c3 non-profit with a board of directors, including equine professionals and community members. "And my role in this new organization would be," Blackwood prompted. "You would be recognized as a founding benefactor," Ethan explained. Your donation of the operating interest would be publicly acknowledged, and you'd have the option of appointing a representative to the board, though not a controlling interest. Blackwood leaned back in his chair, studying them with cool calculation. And what makes you think I would agree to this significant restructuring of our agreement? Because it accomplishes your primary objective while enhancing your public image, Sophia answered, meeting her father's gaze directly. You retain the land buffer you wanted to block Mr. Ackerman's expansion, plus you gain recognition as a philanthropist who helped save a beloved local institution. And my daughter has clearly switched allegiances, Blackwood observed, though without real anger. If anything, he seemed almost impressed by Sophia's confidence. I haven't switched allegiances, Dad, Sophia replied firmly. I'm advocating for what's best for the horses and the rescue. This solution gives everyone something they want while preserving the rescue's mission. Blackwood turned his attention to Ackerman, who had been uncharacteristically quiet throughout the presentation. And you, Richard? What's your stake in this elaborate scheme? Ackerman straightened slightly in his chair. I've agreed to make a significant donation to the new nonprofit, $200,000, enough to establish an operational endowment and put the rescue on solid financial footing. How charitable of you, Blackwood remarked dryly. And in return? In return, I receive the same tax benefits any donor would, Ackerman replied with a slight smile. Plus, of course, the satisfaction of supporting a worthy cause. And thwarting me in the process, Blackwood added. That's merely a bonus, Ackerman conceded. Blackwood rose from his desk, moving to the window that overlooked his expansive estate. For a long moment he was silent, and Ethan found himself holding his breath. You realize, Blackwood said finally, that this proposal effectively removes my ability to control what happens on the land adjacent to the acres I purchased. The nonprofit's charter would include environmental protections and land use restrictions. Megan spoke up for the first time, her voice steady despite her obvious nervousness. The property couldn't be developed in ways that would negatively impact your estate. Blackwood turned, regarding her with newfound interest. You've thought of everything, haven't you? We've tried to address everyone's concerns, Ethan replied. The horses deserve a secure future, one that doesn't depend on corporate rivalries or business interests. Blackwood returned to his desk, studying the draft proposal that lay before him. And if I refuse? If I insist on maintaining our original agreement? Then we proceed as partners, Jackson said simply. We continue working together as agreed, but the potential donation from Mr. Ackerman would be withdrawn, and the rescue would remain dependent on your ongoing financial support to meet those benchmarks you established. The implied threat was clear. Blackwood would be forced to invest more of his own money into a venture that primarily served to block Ackerman, rather than accepting a solution that accomplished the same goal while generating positive publicity. You're more shrewd than I gave you credit for, Jackson, Blackwood admitted with grudging respect. Not shrewd, Jackson corrected. Just determined to protect what matters. A subtle smile played at the corner of Blackwood's mouth. A distinction without much difference in practice. He turned to Ackerman. You understand that even with this arrangement, I'll continue to block any attempt to build a processing facility near my property. I've already identified alternative locations, Ackerman replied with an easy shrug. Sometimes the wisest course is to recognize when a particular battle isn't worth the cost. The tension in the room shifted as both men seemed to reach an unspoken understanding. They were still rivals, would likely always be rivals, but perhaps this particular field didn't need to be part of their battlefield. Sophia, Blackwood addressed his daughter, you support this plan, even though it diminishes your role in the rescue? I'll still be involved, she replied, just as a board member rather than an owner. And yes, I support it completely. These past weeks have shown me how much the rescue means to the community, to the millers, and to the horses themselves. It deserves to exist on its own terms, not as a pawn in a larger game. Blackwood studied his daughter with an expression Ethan couldn't quite read. Pride, perhaps, mixed with something like regret. "Very well," he said finally. "I'll have my legal team review the proposal and suggest any necessary modifications. But in principle, I'm willing to move forward with this restructuring." The wave of relief that washed over Ethan was so powerful, he felt momentarily lightheaded. They'd done it. Against all odds, they'd found a solution that everyone could accept. "There is one condition," Blackwood added, raising a finger. "The new board must include at least one member with significant business experience. Nonprofits still need sound financial management." "We'd welcome that expertise," Jackson agreed readily. "Perhaps Julia Winters would be interested. She seemed to have a good understanding of our operation." "I'll discuss it with her," Blackwood nodded. "Now, if there's nothing else, I believe we've taken enough of everyone's time today." As they prepared to leave, Ackerman approached Ethan and Jackson while Sophia was engaged with her father. "You've managed something remarkable here," he said quietly. "Standing up to two billionaires and somehow getting both of us to agree to your terms. That takes courage." "It takes believing in something bigger than yourself," Ethan replied. Ackerman smiled slightly. "A lesson some of us learned too late." He extended his hand to Jackson. "Looking forward to seeing what you build with this rescue. My grandfather would have approved." Outside, as they walked to Megan's Jeep, the magnitude of what they'd accomplished began to sink in. The rescue would survive. Not just survive, but thrive with proper funding and protection. The horses were safe, their future secure. "I can't believe we pulled it off," Megan said, shaking her head in amazement. "Gramps did most of the heavy lifting," Ethan said, glancing at his grandfather with admiration. "Nonsense," Jackson dismissed the praise. "This was a team effort, and it started with you, Ethan, standing in front of that gate, refusing to let those horses go even when it seemed hopeless." As they drove back toward the farm, Sophia followed in her car. She'd asked to come along, to see the horses one more time as a partner before the transition began. Not that she'd be going anywhere. She'd already made it clear she intended to remain deeply involved, just under the new arrangement. The afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the pastures as they arrived. Without discussion, they all headed straight to the barn, as if drawn by an unspoken need to see the horses, to remind themselves what all the negotiations and legal maneuvering had been for. Inside, the elegant decorations from the gala had been removed, returning the space to its simple, functional state. The horses nickered in greeting as they walked down the center aisle, recognizing the people who had fought so hard for their welfare. At Whisper's stall, Jackson paused, reaching out to stroke the elderly mare's soft muzzle. "Well, old girl," he said softly, "looks like we're going to be all right after all." Ethan moved to stand beside his grandfather, placing a hand on his shoulder. Around them, Megan and Sophia were greeting the other horses, their conversation a gentle backdrop to the moment. "What happens now?" Ethan asked. Jackson smiled, the worry lines that had seemed permanently etched on his face these past weeks finally easing. "Now, we go back to what matters, taking care of these animals, giving them the second chances they deserve. And building something that lasts," Ethan added. "Yes," Jackson agreed, looking around at the barn that had been his life's work, a simple structure filled with extraordinary purpose. Something that lasts. As if understanding the significance of the moment, Whisper gently pressed her head against Jackson's chest in a gesture of trust and affection. In the next stall, Phoenix, the abused horse whose scars told a story of survival, watched with intelligent eyes, no longer afraid. Outside, the sun continued its arc across the spring sky, illuminating the rescue that had weathered its own storm and emerged stronger for it. The New Beginnings Equine Sanctuary stood ready to fulfill its promise, protecting the vulnerable and offering hope where once there had been only uncertainty. It had started with one boy standing firm against a slaughterhouse truck. It would continue as a community united for a purpose greater than any individual, the belief that every life, even those society had discarded, deserved compassion, protection, and a chance to begin again.